Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
We're good?
Yep.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Today is Tuesday, June 23rd, 2026. The time is 4 o'clock p.m. and we are convened as the Ferguson School Board of Education. We are meeting at 280 West, 940 North in Provo, Utah. We'll begin with the roll call. I'm Jennifer Partridge, Board President.
Gina Hales, Board Vice President.
Melanie Hall, Board Member.
Lisa Boyce, Board Member.
Megan Wagner, Board Member.
Emily Harrison, Board Member.
Devin Daly, Business Administrator.
Wendy Dow, Superintendent.
Okay, thank you. And we want to welcome all of our other guests and people here with us today, and excuse Board Member McCabe who had a family emergency come up. So, do we have a motion to convene our study session?
I move that we convene the study session.
Motion made by Board Member Boyce. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Board Member Hall. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we are now convened, and I will turn it over to Board Member Lisa Boyce for our Board Member training.
Okay. This will be quick, but we're talking about superintendent evaluation as a governance tool. And I read through NSBA's resource as well as kind of the manual we have here in the state, and then just kind of summarized what I thought were the pertinent points as a reminder, and also just talk to the public about how we do this. So let's see, go down to the first slide here around kind of why this even matters, right? So the purpose of our superintendent evaluation isn't just to judge Wendy's performance. If we do a good job of this, then it's really a governance tool that helps improve both her effectiveness, but also district outcomes, and it keeps this board focused on the same priorities that you have, and creates a framework for really productive dialogue, hopefully, throughout the year, aligned with the strategic plan. So you can kind of see here, I really like the idea that this should always be aligned with our strategic plan, with the goals that we have, and I really appreciate that now we have those same goals. I feel like when I first came on the board, there were a hidden list of board goals, and then there was a separate list of district goals, and I like that we actually have really clear, objective, strategic goals that govern all of the decisions and work that we're doing. And I like the idea of accountability, and not just for our superintendent, but also for us, because I think that this whole evaluation process is one that goes both ways, right? Like, are we supporting you? What do you need from us so that we're remembering where we are and aren't supposed to be as a board, et cetera. And then just talking about our expectations and building relationships that allow us to work collaboratively. The next slide, I read through, and actually I did a little bit of AI enhanced research, just because it said research says, and I was like, what research? So I went to a couple sources, I was just curious to read about it. That effective evaluations are really goal-based, they're evidence-based, and they're ongoing. So it's not a once-a-year thing, but it should be not unlike what we're going to talk about with our data today around our schools. Something where we have alignment around goals and what supports needed, and then a plan, but then this formative assessment where throughout the year there's maybe some check-ins around how that's going. Feedback can be given in both directions, and then at the end of year kind of a summative evaluation. And I like these kind of best practices. We're going to focus on strategic goals tied directly to our district's plan. We want to use objective evidence and measurable outcomes, and not just board members' opinions, or I know you've been great at soliciting review and evaluation from people at the district as well. But I like the idea of some measurable things there, and then providing ongoing formative feedback throughout the year. It's important. And then we support growth and stay accountable in all directions for how we're doing, and are we allowing and supporting you to do your job, and how can we all make this relationship work most effectively. So that's kind of it. I thought this was an interesting question. They just are talking about, like, when you evaluate superintendent performance, the question to ask as a board is, are we focusing primarily on evidence tied to strategic goals, or are we relying too heavily on impressions and individual observations? And there's probably a balance to strike there, I feel like, right? In terms of subjective and objective measures, but I think that they work together well. And I know that Superintendent Dow has done a self-assessment, and I think we do this typically in the summertime here in Provo. And then she's solicited evaluation and feedback from people that work in the district, and then the board has given evaluation feedback, and I know you've set goals, and so I think that this is just a great kind of cycle here of goal setting and planning, giving time to implement, giving a few check-ins throughout the year for feedback, and seeing how that's going, and then at the end of the year, reevaluating and continuing to support the strategic plan. So that's it.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Anybody have any questions?
No.
I appreciate that we do these every board meeting, just to remind all of us on the things in our handbook and our best practices and training and stuff. So thank you. Okay, next we're going to have a discussion regarding a real estate consultant process. And Devin, will turn that over to you?
So as we are preparing to look at some of our properties for either sale or I've talked to other districts about their process. They usually hire a real estate consultant to not just look at what the sale price would be, but other things that you could do with the land, if there are other options to make revenue without necessarily selling the property. So this discussion is really to start the process of an RFP for a real estate consultant. Wendy and myself are not experts on real estate. And that's one thing that we've heard from the public is they'd really like us to find somebody who is an expert who will make sure that we can maximize the potential of that property. So this is open for discussion.
Go ahead, Lisa.
And is one of the reasons we're doing this then to make sure we're aware of all of our assets as we look at projects coming up or programmatic changes or budget constraints, right? That we know kind of what resources we have and what are different ways we can use them. So
that is part of it. I mean, part of it is, to be able to cover the cost of the build of Timpanogos.
Okay.
Part of it is just to make sure we're using our property well. We've had lots of requests of people to either build on or buy our property. And I would like to make sure we're getting the best options put forth to you before we make a decision.
Janet?
I am just grateful that we're doing this. There have been other instances since I've been on the board where I think this would have been monumentally helpful, and I didn't even know this was a possibility, so I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful that we have this to help us make a decision. And I know that there are some folks that think we've made a decision about a specific property, such as, say, Foxfield. That's not what this is about. This isn't so that we can sell Foxfield. This is so that we can, as Devin has already said, we need to take account of what we have and then decide which properties we have that perhaps could help us pay for the projects that we have going on. So I appreciate this, and I am grateful that we are doing this.
And I would add, not just to help us pay for things, right, but just create a long-term plan of how to best utilize our assets, our resources. What do we want to make sure that we have available for future use? What are we holding on to that could be better used, a better resource by making money from it than holding on to it, right? Like looking at the big picture. I think that's a great idea. Devin, are there any specific questions you want answered from us as you're putting out the RFP?
So we have a couple of different ways that we can do this. We can do it as a consultant, as also do we open it up for people who have developer aspirations? Do we have, what are the parameters you would like in this? Because if a better option is to lease a property to someone, I don't want to stick us in a spot where we only have the ability to sell. So we want to be able to look and see, so what are our options to be able to lease the property or to develop it, but get long-term revenue from those properties. So that could be as much as a consultant coming in saying these are the options, or an actual developer saying this is what I could do. So I'm looking for more ideas on what to add, because I don't want to make it so specific that there's only one option.
Wow. I see this as someone who's familiar with, you know, the field of real estate and all of these kinds of things, but they're neutral. They don't have skin in the game. They're not a developer. They would be able to give us a more neutral view as what's in our interest as a district and as a community who are the taxpayers for this district.
So it would be more of a real estate consultant to look at real estate usage and
help us with
kind of help
that.
us.
Because I feel like if we were to look at something like doing a P3 partnership or leasing land, we would want to do an RFP separately at that point if that decision is made, and have a lot of different developers coming to us versus already kind of having, I don't know, feeling like we already have a relationship that we have to not worry about, that's the wrong word, but I would prefer just a consultant in general without someone who's tied to a developer and going to have, you know, that interest as well. I don't know if that's harder to find, because I know that lots of people working as consultants also, right, are connected
could
to
also-
developers,
correct.
but
Well, it's really hard to find if we don't look.
right.
So at this point, it's just what are we looking for, and what will that cost, and what are the options?
Are there any concerns with us moving forward on a real estate consultant? Or Devin, okay to go ahead and put out the RFP?
Yep. Go for it.
I think
Like
it's
the
worth
cost
this
is
off.
offset, yeah.
Yeah,
So the timeline would be, we'll open the RFP, but we likely will, we're trying to keep your time in July to yourself, so the beginning of August is when we would review those.
okay. Thank you. Next is our discussion on our end of year data, and I'm so excited for this discussion. So it's our number one priority on our strategic plan is our academic achievement, and it's always good for us to look at how we're doing on that. So we'll start with Wendy.
Bonnie, do you mind taking over the screen? All right. First off, I want to thank our team for helping me to put this together. This is not something I do on my own. And so Bridget, who is our research and assessment director, Michelle Eldridge, Doug Finch, Judy Rose, they're all helping to put all of these pieces together, and then ChatGPT helped me make it beautiful. So I really want to acknowledge Chat, and it makes me feel very professional. So this is just a review of our end of year data, and these slides are, so a couple of things to keep in mind. I really asked them to take the data and to process it without necessarily calling out specific schools, because we're trying to get a 30,000 foot view of what is happening with the district. I'm going to show you some ways in which it's going to be potentially available for you to start drilling down into individual schools that you represent, so you can look at it and look at that more thoroughly and in greater detail. I do already have all of that data that I can share with you with Acadians for both reading and math. And then I don't know that I necessarily want Bridget to start pulling all of that data for RISE and Aspire Plus, because we do have a dashboard that I'm going to show you a little bit of today that will allow us to do that, and it will save us a lot of time in the long run. So really, I'll probably go through many of the slides quite quickly, but what I will do is at the end, I want to talk more about what our response is to the different pieces, but we just wanted to lay out each type of assessment and what it's showing us, so that
people also are understanding why we do the assessments that we do, because you hear a lot, like, why are we assessing so much? And so I think that's an important piece of this. So we thought it was really important to start with a couple of definitions. So you'll hear the phrase a screener or a progress monitoring tool. That your Acadience Reading and your Acadience Math are a type of screener. It is going to flag an at-risk student and help us with what those immediate interventions need to be. And we do that 3 times a year with each of those. Then we have growth trackers, which NWEA is super great with, that helps us. It's adaptive, so it really can show us how a student is doing over the long term. So as we're tracking that data from elementary school into high school, we can actually see how they're comparing to their peers across the country, since so many students are taking this assessment. It is a norm reference test. I do want to point to the right side of the slide where it talks about a percentage versus a percentile. A percentage this is how many they got right. So when we say 80%, that's they got 80% of the questions right. It's measuring the mastery of the material. When we're talking about percentile, it means when they're in the 80th percentile, that means they beat out the other 80 percentile of the students in that process. So they're in a top tier group of students because they're in that top 20 percentile across the nation. So that's kind of important to keep in mind as you're looking at NWEA. And I have Michelle and Judy here, so they'll pipe in and correct me when I say something wrong. And then we have our summative and accountability tests like our Utah RISE, our Utah Aspire Plus, and ACT. And these are measuring grade level standards. And so this kind of shows you a little bit that's pretty important. So Acadience Reading and Math are testing your basic skills in reading and math. Do I have computational fluency? Do I know the names and sounds of the letters? Do I know how to blend words together? Can I break apart a word into its different syllables? And I can't access grade level standards unless I know how to read and unless I know basic computational skills in math. So that's what Acadience is doing. So sometimes people are like, well, how come Acadience isn't directly correlating all of the time to RISE? Acadience is like this gatekeeper that helps us know if our students can even access grade level content. If they're scoring low in Acadience, then they're probably not going to score well on RISE because they can't access those grade level standards. So we're looking at that Acadience that is happening in the elementary school. NWEA is something that's looking at the whole system. So we test in math, we test in reading, and we test in science. And it's really tracking. We can start to get some really good trend data because it will adapt to the students where they're at. And it will also show you, like, if a student is outpacing their grade level, we can see if they're making growth and what that actually looks like. That's been a challenge for us with our gifted students or students that are accelerated, is we haven't been able to track as well what their growth level is. This is tested 3 times a year and allows us to do that. RISE does give us growth as well, but it's a snapshot once a year. So the NWEA is providing that data all the time. Then we have RISE and we have Utah Aspire Plus, which, by the way, is going away. This is last year. Utah Aspire Plus was being administered. We are switching over to RISE for 9th and 10th grade. And it is directly tied to the Utah State Core. It is a Utah-based assessment. It's based on our standards, and it really shows, did the teacher teach that grade level content for that year? Did the student learn that grade level content for that year? And then we have the ACT, which is a college readiness indicator. So I think it's important to understand that it does feel like a lot of assessments, and I understand that. We understand that from the perspective of our teachers and our parents, but it's providing different snapshots, and each of those pieces of data help us. And actually with Senate Bill 241, these different snapshots of data become even more important as we're looking at the reading progress of students, because we want more data points, especially if we have a student that isn't meeting the grade level requirements that are now in Senate Bill 241. So Acadience Reading and Math, it basically, like I said, basic skill detection, basically measures progress, and we can set goals on, we would call those foundational benchmarks, right? And so that's really important. And then it enables teachers to focus instruction on skill gaps for groups and individuals, and really builds that foundation for future success. So, as we start diving into each of these data points, I just want you to know that, like I said, we're not going to drill down, and I'm not going to necessarily highlight any specific schools, but I wanted to show you just a little prototype. This is in our development build of what we're seeing on our data dashboard. So you'll see here, for example, I have all of the assessments that are listed there. I can start, so this, for example, is Acadience reading. This gives me my distribution, and by the way, I can click on this and it'll pull up the name of every single student in the district that falls in that. I will not do that since we're live on YouTube. Now I can start to look at, you notice each of these are the individual skills for Acadience reading, and it shows you how many students are blue, green, yellow, or red, and we're trying to match those colors so it makes sense to teachers with Acadience. Those are all drillable. I think this just got added today because we asked for it, but it's done by demographics. So I can also look at it by race and ethnicity, and that's also drillable, by if they're a multilingual learner, if they're a special education student, what we're seeing across the board. And then this really cool piece at the top allows me to start comparing different schools. So if I wanted to get a snapshot of our highly impacted schools, I could add Timpanogos, Franklin, and Spring Creek, and I could say, I want to look at first grade reading on Acadience, and it would show me what the distribution of those scores are across the board. So I can start to drill into that. So this is still in its beta phase, but shout out to Chad and his team and Michelle and everybody who's making this happen, because I think we just started talking about this in February or March, and we're already at this point. So this is pretty impressive. We're in the process of adding attendance, so there will be an attendance tile that we can drill down into. So that will allow us to drill in. I'll be able to see, okay, which students in our district are below proficiency on Acadience reading that are also chronically absent, that are multilingual. And I can pull a list of all of those students and see what's happening or what schools they're in and what's taking place there. We're also, the state requires us to have an early warning system, which we've used PowerSchool for, but now we can really utilize the dashboard. So we can start to, it will color code a student based on their risk factors, so we can identify really quickly if a student is in jeopardy of not doing well.
I love it. I'm wondering, for parents, is there used to be on PowerSchool a way you could go in, and it wasn't always all of the tests though, but if I'm a parent and I want to see how is my third grader doing, is there a way I have access to just my students' data on this? Or is there a summer? I'm just wondering,
Yes.
if I'm a parent, maybe I just email the teacher.
It's all there.
Okay.
My daughter, I looked within the last month.
Okay,
and
great.
saw the test. Some of them weren't in yet,
Sure,
but
sure.
some of them she did, it was 2 weeks later, and it was 3 weeks
Okay,
later.
but that's what, is it in PowerSchool? Then
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and as a parent, when you log in, there's a button where it says assessments, and it has
Yeah.
all the assessments for you.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And
but
that
I
is
just want-
updated as of a week ago.
Awesome. You guys are amazing. Thank you.
One of the things we were looking at is, we were talking about, we want to be able to drill into a student, and I don't want to show that here because I don't have a demo student to show you. But I could pull up a high school student, I can see how many credits they have, I can look at their transcript, I can see if they're failing any courses, I can see what their attendance is, and then I can see all of their testing data as well. Also be adding in all of the behavior data as well, so that you can sort by that, like who has been suspended, so that's also a risk factor that comes into play. And then we also have this awesome thing of no risk factors. Can we sort the students that are below proficiency, that have none of these risk factors, that are showing up every day, that aren't English language learners, and what's happening there, and what kinds of systemic changes or things do we need to put in place to support those students. So I'm really excited about this.
Who will have access to this dashboard?
So all of the principals, a teacher will have access to their students only. We have to work through, we were just talking today in our meeting about working through all of the different permissions. You'll have access as a board member. You'll be able to see whole school data and district data. It won't be drillable down into the student level, but, and principals will be able to see like down to the individual student level at their school, but they can also compare their school to another school, but not see the individual students at a different school, if that makes sense. So we just have to be really conscientious about what those permissions start to look like and who has access, because it will be a lot of data for the students. So we're super excited about this, and I mean, this is just like a dream come true for me. So
Does this mean we don't need Domo?
yes, so that's going to be the next piece, is that we're going to get all of the financial stuff onto this as well, so that we won't have to have Domo for it, and it's all just built by our own programmers in-house, and it can be adapted to whatever we need. So pretty excited about all the things. So with that, just a couple of things that I want to talk about with Acadiance reading. You'll notice that 76% of our students in grades 1 through 3 made expected or accelerated reading progress. That is a 3% increase over 2025. And every grade level is demonstrating growth. We're not having, grade levels go backwards and things like that. So that's awesome. We do still have to focus on closing those achievement gaps. So that's something that we'll talk more about as we go through this. You'll know that Senate Bill 241 says that by 2030, so next year's kindergartners that are coming in, by the time they're in 3rd grade, they need to be on grade level for reading as measured by Acadiance reading. So that means they have to be either green, I just refer to as colors, green or blue. They're at benchmark or well above benchmark. And we're already at 76%, so we don't feel like this is going to be a heavy lift for us to get to that 80%. Of course, we don't want it to be just 80%, so we want that number to be 100%. And so just so that you're aware, we already have 7 of our 13 schools that have already surpassed that goal. And so we're really focusing on that, and you're noticing that intentionality will just increase with this emphasis. I'm actually excited about this legislation and the potential that it has to support us through this process. Notice the opportunity, and I love calling it opportunities for improvement rather than these are our areas of concern or these are our challenges, or I mean they are challenges, but I think when we're looking at students who are below or well below benchmark, we want those numbers to be between 80 and 100% where we're closing that achievement gap, where they're actually bumping up. And so you'll see that we have significant success in kindergarten and 3rd grade. We need to do better in, that's an area of focus district-wide.
Are those the growth numbers? How many kids made growth?
Yes.
What is that number?
So what it says is that 55% of our kindergartners that were below or well below benchmark were making enough progress that they can move beyond that. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Did I say that right?
Yeah.
That's right,
Yeah,
80
those 55% made above or well above.
Typical growth.
Okay.
So 55% had their gap closed.
Gotcha.
So if we're 80 to 100,
Then that's,
closing their gap.
and that's really why we see stagnant scores in terms of proficiency, is if we're not closing that gap, we're not able to ever move that line. Just our proficient students stay proficient, and our students who are not proficient stay not proficient. That's not what we want. We want our students who are proficient stay proficient, and students who are not proficient to be moving forward. And so they need to make more than a year's worth of growth, which is why they have to be above typical growth.
Which is where that dashboard's going to come in to help.
Yes.
Yes.
So good.
And we already have access to those things through the dashboard with Acadiance, the dashboard with NWA. But you have to go in and log into each thing. This is now centralized in a single location, so I can access all of the data on a student or on my class, and I don't have to be navigating all of the different dashboards together. So we're getting them all to talk to each other, which I think is really exciting. Acadiance Math, I also see this as a huge success as well. We did really well in math. The Utah Early Learning Plan was really focused on math, and we met those goals in math. And now what we want to do is to make sure that we're continuing to just accelerate that growth, right, to close those achievement gaps. It's a very similar type of situation here. I loved this. If you look at goal 3, where 60% of 1st through 3rd grade students make typical or better growth on pathways of progress from BOA means beginning of year to end of year. Notice that in 2024 we were at 50.5%. We are now at 75.8%. That is a huge celebration. Like when you look at the principals and the teachers and just how much effort they have put in and how intentional they have been with math instruction, it is so amazing. And what you see is, I think one major takeaway is when you intentionally are being so careful and really looking at data and really analyzing why we're doing certain things, it really does result in like just tremendous opportunities and growth for our students. So we're excited about that. Now we move to RISE, and so we have, note that RISE is only 3rd through 8th grade. This just kind of shows you a breakdown of all of the ELA, math, and science. You can kind of look through that.
Is that average third?
Yes, it's averaging. Yes, it's averaging those. Great question. And you'll also notice in these kind of takeaways is that we're meeting state averages a lot of times. That still doesn't make me feel very happy because the state average isn't always like amazing, you know, especially when you're starting to look at math in particular. But when you're looking at like English language arts, what is so cool about this is as we go into the RISE platform, we can start to go in and see what specific strands students are not doing well in. So notice here, a systemic area of strength from 3rd through 6th grade is actually reading informational text, which I think is fascinating. And the reading literature piece is less, and that's something we've even heard from teachers where they're not reading whole text. That starts to actually happen more in middle school and high school. So then that would be something that we want to address, right? So we're falling below those proficiency standards. Notice here that we do see significant gaps between our schools that are performing well and our schools that aren't. You notice that our proficiency rates in some of our schools are 12 to 13% in some of those cases. That's not, you know, every principal is just like horrified by that, right? So it's about, okay, what are we doing to start moving that needle? So even though we have these successes, we do know we have pockets of major improvement. Very similar kind of thing with math, but it is an exceptional area of strength in elementary school. Just make sure I'm saying elementary school. Every single grade level, 3rd through 6th, was outperforming the state average. Notice 6th grade finishing nearly 10% higher than the state on RISE. Is this?
No, I'm just saying the match between Acadians.
Oh, the match between Acadians math. Please say that out loud so everyone can hear.
The math increase in upper grades, I can see a correlate with the increase of the Acadians math skills paying off with the application to upper grade RISE standards being met. Those two correlates have just gotten higher together.
So people are always asking, well, why do we do both? They are measuring different things, and so they're both really important, but your student isn't going to be able to do well on RISE if they're not doing well on Acadians. Notice that 8 to 10 schools per grade level are beating the state average, and then we can actually drill down, and I just love this, where we can find what specific strands we're excelling in, and then notice we can also find the areas where we need more instructional support. And so those opportunities for improvement then become areas where our specialists, like our math specialists, can help, and we can be working with teachers on how to support with that.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, is there a way to look and see, like, because I'm thinking about curriculum, right, that we use. Like, if you were to look at state or at districts using our same curriculum, I don't know, I'm just trying to see, like, could you identify sometimes where there might be something that can be added or altered within the curriculum to support the teacher in teaching that? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Like, is this that, anyway, just in terms of drilling even further down into what that need is. I know
maybe
you have
resources might be there.
resources for that, but it would be fascinating if we found that across, you know, a group of people using a similar curriculum, they all have this area lower, like maybe it's information that they could use. And that's beyond the curriculum developer to be looking at as well,
Yeah, no, that's
obviously,
awesome.
but it would maybe inform us also.
It would, that's an excellent point. Then we have RISE Science. Science is only given 4th through 6th grade, so I apologize that I said 3rd through 6th grade. Grade 5 is a bright spot, tracking 2% above the state average. And then notice it tells us also about areas where, you know, we have some gaps, wave patterns, earth systems. So that's a piece of it. What are the resources that our teachers actually have for science, and what kinds of things do we need to be providing there, and what does that look like? So it's giving us some information that we really haven't looked at systemically before, that is very exciting, that we're now really examining much more carefully. So let's switch to RISE for 7th and 8th grades. You can see the proficiency scores there. This is for both of for Shoreline and for Centennial. You'll notice that it kind of switches as you go to middle school, where students are better at reading literature and they're struggling more with reading informational text. I think that reading informational text is getting more difficult. It's getting a lot more laden with vocabulary that's tied to a specific content area. And then notice that we have, you know, some areas where our schools there is a gap that's existing, and so trying to look through that and figure out what do we need to do to help support those schools extensively. So then we have math. So we have 7th grade shows notable traction, gives us again this same idea. Now I think this is really interesting, because in 7th and 8th grades, those that are taking secondary math 1 are accelerated students. And so we have 78%, so that is a great proficiency rate. But when you look at the state average of accelerated students, they're scoring at 91%. So our accelerated students are not performing as well as the accelerated students in other districts. That's an area that we really need to look at. Like, what is happening there? So even though we're moving them through math more quickly, their understanding of that math is not as thorough as what we're seeing in other areas. So that's an area that we really need to look at and evaluate. Science, you can kind of see this, 8th grade falling below the state average. And really a piece of this is also just assessing, you know, to your point, Lisa, about what are the resources that are being provided to the teachers. Do they have the right training? Do they feel like they have what they need? We do have the SEED standards, right, in 7th and 8th grade. And I don't know, I feel like those have been in place for a while. I can't remember when they were introduced. Yeah, that's what I felt like. And so so is there, we need to look at that more carefully and see what's happening in science. Yes, please.
When the SEED standards were adopted and we didn't go with the curriculum program, it was right when the next gen science standards were adopted, and publishers hadn't caught up to that yet. So there really wasn't a curriculum, a program at all that met the new standards at the time of our adoption.
Okay.
It's probably really different now.
Okay. Thank you. And then we want to switch and talk a little bit about NWEA. Notice that NWEA does serve as a predictor of our state assessment proficiency. You can see on the left-hand side of this particular chart, it shows what their RIT scores are. So that's what their raw score has to be if we're going to jump an entire level. On that, we've analyzed that. So this is really great data for our principals to have and for our teachers to have, to see it's not just about the percentage of students that are achieving on the NWEA, but what is the RIT score, and are they actually going to bump a level? And so we have taught them how to do that, and they've been diving into that data quite a bit. And then you'll see also the percentile achievement as a predictor as well that can help inform us. We don't do, most of our schools don't do the language usage test, so we are sticking with reading, math, and science in this process. So a lot of people ask, why do we do the NWEA when we also are doing RISE or also doing Aspire Plus? It's because it is giving us that trend line data across grade levels, and it's showing the growth of that student over multiple years. You can't say that with RISE because each year the standards are very different, and so it's just assessing those standards. And this is really comparing the students to their peers across the country, so we can start to see, you know, how are our kids measuring up across the nation in terms of what this looks like. So the NWEA becomes a really powerful tool. It also, as we've shown you those growth quadrants before, we can also really see students that might not be reaching proficiency levels, but their growth is off the charts. That really helps with our schools that are where kids are coming in 2 or 3 grade levels behind. We're able to see how far that teacher is moving those students along and how far that school is adding value to those particular students. Notice here's our data for NWEA 3rd through 6th grades. We didn't do reading, so you'll notice that scores are not reported as this test was not mandatory. We only had small populations doing the reading. If they were blue on Acadians, then they would do NWEA reading. But we have our math and science there. And notice again, math, tremendous strength there. And it is that intentionality that's in place. Reading, all intermediate grades are performing well above the national norm. I still don't feel like 63rd to 65th percentile is where I want to be. I always want to be like, let's be in the 90th percentile. But it just helps us kind of see one of the things that we really do need to pay greater attention to is our students that are in the bottom tier of those populations. What are we really doing to support those students, and what does that look like? And do our teachers have the skills to be able to support them effectively? You'll see this with math as well, just different data that's pulling through. With this, notice there's a grade 5 dip in math, so has the lowest median achievement. So that's just where we can start to dive in and figure out what skill is missing here and what's happening there. So it gives us a lot of really great information. Well, what's really interesting about it is our principals and even our building leadership teams are asking for this data. Like, they don't want this to go away in any way, shape, or form. We have science, 7th and 8th grades, major takeaways in NWEA. And so you can kind of read through that as well. And then this breaks it down by each subject level. I still don't feel like when we're outperforming ahead of national norms in the 66th percentile, it still just doesn't, it's just not where I want us to be. And notice it's really important to note that a lot of people think, well, if they're in the 66th percentile, that means that's where our RISE data is going to land. That's not accurate. Your RIT score is what's going to help you with that. So that's why we have to make sure that we're educating our teachers and our principals in how to utilize that. Notice this, that 1/3 of all students achieve scores in the highest bracket in reading, and so we do have some very advanced readers. I mean, you hear this from parents all the time. We're taking, there's a lot of resources that are going to our students that are struggling. What resources are going towards our students that need that support for acceleration and challenge and much greater rigor. Here we have math also. And then science, like I said, I'm going to skip through these pretty quickly. I think some of you have been able to look at this, but it's out there. We did attach it onto board books so people could look at this more extensively. One of the things that we start to see that NWEA and certainly Aspire Plus creates an issue with is that you'll notice challenges here, late high school decline. 11th grade marks a clear downward shift. We don't know how much of that is. We have to start diving into how many kids are actually taking the assessment. Are our top tier students taking the assessment? What does this actually look like? And so how is this actually manifesting itself? I do think we have a lot of teachers that appreciate this data and are really encouraging and creating a dialogue with their students to set goals with this. We also have other teachers where that's not quite a part of their repertoire yet, and so just a challenge that we have in that respect too. Again, an 11th grade drop off, and I think we were talking in our district leadership team this morning about just how much of that drop off is where we stop testing the most advanced students, right? And so we have to really look at that not a little bit, but we have to take that into consideration as we're examining the data. Science is also difficult because our students are taking really specific science courses, and this is just looking at science in general. The same thing with Aspire Plus. We see that as well. And then I do think, Aspire Plus, and I predict that this will happen once we switch to RISE, is that we see this discrepancy between proficiency and like graduation rates, right? Like, why do we have high graduation rates? We don't have high proficiency rates. What's happening there? And an attempt to start to figure out why those are not matching up and what we can do there. So we have that's reading. This is math. We have science. I don't know if you have any questions about any of those. And then we also want to look at the growth of the lowest 25%. A lot of those students are also identified in that particular category. They might also be multilingual learners or students with disabilities. And so they're being counted on our accountability report in multiple areas. So if we can get those growth scores up, it's helping us in multiple areas as part of that. I think some of the things that we have really tried to implement, particularly with our students with disabilities, is Nate has been very intentional in making sure that our students have access to core curriculum and that they're learning the standards, grade level standards. Before, teachers were just kind of creating all of this on their own. And so now it's how do we train our teachers in how to utilize the curriculum that we actually have. How are we intentionally planning a lesson to create entry points for a multilingual learner? What am I doing when I'm an 8th grade science teacher and I have a multilingual student who's at a level 2? How do I create those entry points when language can be a barrier? That takes really intentional planning to be able to do that. You can't just wing it and just hope for the best. Like, that's not going to work. So.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do we have, under new law, more of our special ed students will be taking
Yes.
some of the RISE testing? Is that the testing they'll be doing, or is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct. So some of our overarching takeaways is we do have some really, celebratory results on Acadians reading and math, and well positioned to build those skill sets. Elementary math, more than anything, shows that intentionality makes such a difference. But we also are seeing this struggle to close the achievement gap. Even when we break it down by school, we can see, I have 43 students in this class that are red or yellow, and we only moved 8 of them out of that. Only 8 of them made above typical growth. Like, that's problematic, right? Like, we need to be identifying those specific students and how we're going to help them. One of the things that we see particularly, we see this K-12 in my opinion, is your rigor of your classroom instruction is not matching the rigor required of your state assessments. So it's like, we were actually talking today, I would really love to see, for example, middle school grades, the average GPA in a particular subject area matched to NWEA, matched to RISE, because that will tell us if the rigor of that class is actually matching those particular assessments. And can give us some additional data there. So that's something I'll have Bridget start working on. And then we have a couple of things where we put kids in tier 2 interventions, and those are kind of in this little separate box. And we're not always helping them to take those skills and the gaps that we're filling and move them into tier 1 instruction at both the elementary level and the secondary level. So helping our teachers really be intentional with what that looks like is really important. We are great at maintaining. Students who come in proficient typically stay proficient. A year's worth of growth. We're awesome. But we need to be more confident in our ability to move those students that are below grade level. And so that's why we put greater belief in collective teacher and educator efficacy is needed. When I was talking with Brooke, the principal at Franklin, I said, do you think your teachers believe that they can actually move their students along? She goes, we are in the beginning stages of that. They're starting to see that they have the skill set for that, but that has been something that they're not sure that they have that. Some of them, are newer teachers. So next steps, connecting tier 1 to tier 2, being aware of the opportunity bubble. I think Doug Finch this morning was looking at the number of students that are right on the cusp of being proficient in several different subject areas, just having our teachers being very aware of those kids, and then making sure kids that are just barely proficient, as Daryl was saying, don't fall back into not being proficient. But we can only do that if we're disaggregating that data by student and really examining that clearly. And then we are rolling out a universal observation tool. We want tier 1 instruction to be rigorous. We want to I want to be able to go into a classroom and see that there is an intentional lesson plan, that we're intentionally creating access points for students with disabilities and multilingual learners. What does the literacy block instruction look like at the elementary level? And then we want to take those observation tools and look at the engagement of students and then start to track our system as a whole so we know how to provide the right professional development for teachers. It is not that I'm going to go into a classroom with a walkthrough tool and that I'm giving feedback to that teacher. The principal is responsible for giving that feedback to the teacher, but we can start to see as the district where our structure is not supporting our teachers effectively. So that's something that we need to do. And then we also need to make sure that our teachers and our community really understand the very discrete purposes of each of these assessments, because they do feel it is a tax on their time. So helping them with the administration of those assessments and also the analysis of it. All right, I went over by 6 minutes.
This is important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, what questions do you have?
I have one.
I have one question,
Oh.
forgive me.
Please.
Way back on the dashboard.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful tool. Congratulations to all of you for that. How are you going to keep it up to date?
Oh, so I will let Michelle in chat. That pulls data every single day.
Automatic.
It's live.
Live from our student information.
How awesome is that?
Yes.
It's amazing. I'm so excited.
Double congratulations.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit more? So one of the next steps is intentionally connecting Tier 1 to Tier 2. What does that mean?
Oh,
What
great
does it
question.
look like?
Great question. So, Michelle, do you want to give the example? You explained it, so I'm happy to explain it, but you gave an example of a teacher using, let's go in, we're doing wonders. Let's see, I can remember this example. So I went into a classroom and watched a 3rd grade lesson in wonders, and they were reading out of a text. And one of the students was really struggling with sounding out or reading some of the words. And the teacher was just going in and reading it for them and correcting them as they went. So one of the cool things that could be is that kid is probably getting some Tier 2 support for reading. So what if the teacher said, we're going to go in and underline all of the words with the short A sound, and they went in and everybody just did that as a class. Okay, what is short A? What does this look like? And they reviewed that ahead of time. Then that's connecting that Tier 2 piece with what they're doing in Tier 1. And it doesn't segregate that child either, because everybody's a part of it, and it just becomes a piece of that.
That's a perfect example. So yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah.
Which is good for all kids.
All kids. Yes, all
It
kids.
doesn't take a lot of time. You don't have to have a whole lesson on short A for the 5 kids who don't know that.
No,
That's okay. You just quickly review it. Same thing happens in secondary.
I was just
So
thinking about that.
working with the secondary reading foundational skills class teachers, helping them transition in their PLC, like with the ELA teachers and science teachers, on knowing how to break apart a multisyllabic word. If in the foundational skills class, you have a group of kids who are still trying to learn to decode, when your science teachers can just take 5 minutes to break apart multisyllabic words, that's helping connect their Tier 2 to their Tier 1.
That would be an example of that.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions? Melanie?
This data dashboard is great. Is there a way that we can license it and get it to the other towns?
Oh, well, we stole it from Canyon, so we might. So we had a dashboard like this in Canyons, and we were trying to decide whether we were going to use Domo and hire Domo to create all of the dashboards. And Chad said to me, he's like, what is it you want it to look like? And I said, well, I want it to look like Canyon's dashboard. And he goes, well, why don't I just go look at Canyon's dashboard and see if we can recreate it? So he took all of his people up there, and they're like, oh yeah, we can easily recreate this. I'm like, winning!
Right.
So it's amazing. So I'm so excited.
Thank you.
So just the drilling down, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is so incredible. So,
Lisa?
Yeah, one question I have on the next steps, when you were talking about kind of rigor and making sure that we see where we can support teachers. I'm wondering if there's also a feedback loop where teachers can say, I'm trying to do this wonders lesson, and do you know what I'm saying? Like where they can give the feedback to their building leadership team or their principal or whomever to say like,
There's a gap here.
Yeah, I could use, like,
I could
here's
use some
a
help
piece
here.
of,
Here's where I
a
need
piece of
support.
my tools that for some reason isn't precise enough for the need I have in my classroom. So that there's, we're able to look and give feedback in terms of instructional practice, but they can also give feedback in terms of resource need, et cetera. Just, because sometimes, like, when you have a curriculum and you feel like you're really adept with it, you will see a need that you can't quite target. And I know that usually that means if you go to Michelle, she's got a whole menu of things you can use. But just, I don't know, I just want to make sure we're getting that feedback from teachers to us also to say, here's a need.
I think that's one of the things that the instructional coach becomes really important with,
Okay.
because as they're going in and then providing that feedback. I mean, we were just talking about, as I've gone out to listening tours, some of the teachers have said, I need some more help with some math interventions. And so then that's a piece where it's like, what are we, what is going to work in this particular instance to help support our teachers with that? That's not always just sticking a kid on a computer program, right? So what are those resources we can actually give them?
And our new teachers then have instructional coaches and mentors.
Yes, yes. I do think that we need to be, one of the things that happened was, I'll give this example. I think it was Kim at Westridge that was talking about she didn't feel like she had all of the research. I think it was for math, Judy, if I remember. And she had Tatum come in and work with her, and they discovered that there were all of these resources to help support students, and the teachers didn't know that they were actually embedded into the curriculum. So then Kim worked with it, and then she actually taught her teachers how to do it. So she was like in the trenches right with them to help them, which is just what a great leader does. Yeah. So I do think we're getting better at that, and I do think we need to be conscientious about our messaging to teachers to make sure that they understand that they need to say, I hear that a lot too with writing, like we don't have good writing tools, and what might that look like. And so, and then I take it back to these guys, right? Like I'll say, you see, and Judy just went, yes we do.
That's the thing, I believe that they're here. I just want to make sure our teachers understand it's great to ask that question and have that.
Got it.
Absolutely. Other questions? And my last question is kind of along those lines. How are these next steps going to be shared with teachers? Is that a district level conversation? Is it their principals talking to them?
It'll be a combination of that. I think one of the things that we shared out already with principals is a little bit of this conversation of our universal observation tool. We haven't shared exactly all of the pieces of that. We want them to make a commitment that if we're going to have an improvement in Tier 1 instruction, they need to be committing to how many minutes or how many classrooms am I visiting every single week, so that they're accountable to that on a weekly basis. It doesn't mean every week is going to go well, right? But so we've talked with principals about that. I think they're nervous about that because they want to make sure that teachers don't feel like that becomes a gotcha moment. I see it as becomes like a formative assessment. This is like when you have checks for understanding with your students, so that you can see how your teaching is going. This informs us in terms of our system. It'll be a shift for some of our teachers, but I'm going to talk about it in the opening meeting. Principals will also be talking about it. We need to be really clear about distinguishing between an observation, for example, that's happening that's tied to an evaluation versus an observation that's happening to inform our system and just to provide that informal feedback. Because we don't want people to become, we want to be really conscientious of the culture that we create here in Provo. I think that's really important. And then already our building leadership teams have already gone through all of their end of year data. So they've been going through and looking at their bubble students, they've been looking at their school improvement plan goals for the following year, and designing their professional development already for teachers based on that. So they've already like dived into all of this data and looked through it and created plans with us. It was pretty exciting to see that.
Can a teacher specifically access and see, like when you are pulling out, like here's the specific skill?
Yes,
that
they
in terms of algebraic functions or wave patterns, whatever. A teacher can use that to improve their own practice individually also then.
Yep, okay, absolutely. I can see that as my class. I can see where my strengths are or what happened. And I think not a lot of people understand that. When I was at the superintendent's conference last week, we had a superintendent that tried to propose that we should get rid of all accountability measures and that all of the testing should go away. And I was like, whoa, time out. And there were a couple that were kind of getting on that bandwagon, and I was like, I need to speak up here. Like this, that's not okay to me. And what this is demonstrating is that we're not always understanding all of the tools that these assessments are actually providing. So that's a training issue. That's not the tool that's the problem. It's that we're not knowing how to use it effectively. So.
Okay, this is wonderful.
awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, excited to see where we go this year with all of these discussions and how we're gonna dive even deeper and help our students even more.
I'm just excited too that like since I got, like from the time that I started here, I didn't feel like we had access to a lot of this data. And now I just feel like it's becoming a part of the culture, and it just makes me really, we're not afraid of it. So it's exciting. So appreciate that.
All right, moving on to our next agenda item is our update on our elementary DLI and boundary parent committee. And so I will give that update. We accepted applications from the community, which closed on June 15th. We had 100 applicants, and we have about 26 spots. So the plan is 2 per school. Some of the schools had 12, 13, up to 16 applicants from one school. So now we are going through and trying to be very thoughtful in our approach. Like, it's hard to turn anybody away. We're grateful for the participation and have some very wonderful parents who have put themselves out there, and we appreciate that. But we're trying to narrow it down to create a committee that will have a variety of perspectives and be able to work together to help the board as we talk about our dual language immersion program and how to create the best one we can for our district and our needs, as well as putting together a policy on boundaries and metrics if we ever needed to do school closures and things like that. So we're finalizing that as a board, and then we hope to inform all of the applicants sometime next week before the 4th of July, whether they were accepted or an alternate, or that we just weren't able to utilize them at this time. We're also looking into some other opportunities as a district of maybe doing some focus groups, parent surveys. Obviously, we're going to keep talking about this in very public meetings, so there will be opportunities for people who aren't able to be on this committee to engage with us in other ways as we continue this discussion. So,
I would also hope that some of those parents that aren't chosen for this committee might be willing to serve on our community connections or
Yes.
parent advisory committee, so
We
they
have
can
open
still. Yeah, we do.
Links for that.
Okay, so we will include
Yeah.
that in the letter
Yeah,
that
okay.
we send, that if they're interested in that, I'll work with you on how they can
That sounds great.
reach out about that. So, yes, Lisa.
I wondered, I know how great it's been to have the website giving updates on these conversations that we've had, so maybe as we have these parent committee meetings, there maybe be minutes like if, I don't know, if one of us as a board member even wants to take turns typing up those minutes and sharing them, could those get posted on the web? That way, I'm a parent that didn't get to be on that committee, but I'm really invested in this conversation. I could still access that and send an email with my own ideas or whatever, based on what's discussed.
Okay? Yeah. Okay. Anyone have anything else to add?
We just need to get our names to you by tomorrow, right?
Thursday morning at the latest.
Thursday morning, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you for everyone's hard work on that. So. Okay, next item is our large purchase request, and I'll turn that over to Devin.
So we have 3 tonight. We have one that's actually on the capital improvement list for this next year. We just need to get the order done. It's for the Amelia Earhart skylights. This was going to be combined with the roof project last year, but timing didn't work out. So this is just to replace those skylights. The second one is some concrete repair around the playgrounds at Canyon Crest. So there are some significant issues with the curb and gutter around those playgrounds. So that is to replace and fix all of that. And then the last one is the last 4 schools' intercom systems that will bring us in compliance with the state security guidelines for the notification with panic buttons and the requirements that we have with school security.
I was wondering about those because they're newer, some of our newer schools.
Correct. Yep, but the new requirements that the state gave us for ability to communicate from classrooms made it so we had to update the newer ones. They were on an older, not an older, the intercom system still worked great. It just was not compatible with panic devices that are required. So, not necessarily, it's not specifically an unfunded mandate, but it is kind of.
I was going to ask that question.
Yes, so
It's
we did receive
$250,000.
It's $362,000 with all
I
4
figured
of
that
them
out very
together.
quickly. I just knew it was
Yeah.
over, but wow.
Yep, it's $362,000
I room for growth.
altogether, and we did not receive any funding for that. That is just part of our
Wow,
our
that's a
annual
lot of money.
tech expenditure.
But it's a mandate from the state.
We are required to bring all of our systems into compliance.
Part of the safety bill.
I'm getting glares from Chad.
That's what it is. Tech's expensive.
Yeah,
I just
so-
didn't know if it was more that I know tech gets outdated sooner. If this was just,
A lot sooner. I mean, like this isn't far out of our normal replacement cycle. But this will also solve problems like in Purple High, we're having issues with getting like strobes in the auto shops and metal shops and places where it's so loud they can't hear the announcements and they call them lockdowns or things like that. So this brings us into compliance with that and lets us put strobes in those areas so they can know that there's an event happening. They're multicolored strobes that work and those kind of things. So that's all part of this as well.
okay.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Is this money that was part of our capital, like,
Yes,
planned
this is part of,
expenses?
yeah, this is part of his annual budget.
Okay.
For all of them.
It comes
Amelia
out of the
Earhart is
capital
part of
fund.
this, this next year's budget. It's not gonna be done in the next week, so it
The
will come
Amelia
out of
will.
next year's, the
Okay.
Amelia Earhart
Okay.
skylights. And also the concrete, that was part of next year's.
Next year's budget, okay.
In the
Yep, and the
children's plan.
hardscape. So we have budgets every year for hardscape, electrical, plumbing, so those projects and some of those smaller ones that don't require us to necessarily go out and do an RFP for them, that we do have a budget for that every year.
But all schools will, after this will be up to date with intercom.
On the intercom systems, yes.
Do we actually have the right equipment? Are we still waiting on the state on that? Or is that's maybe not a question we can answer publicly.
I believe the equipment that we're getting is the one that is recommended, that
Okay.
audio enhancement works with.
I just
so-
know we were waiting for the state to distribute specific buttons.
On panic buttons, yes,
Yeah.
but the intercom system does not include the panic buttons. Those are
Right.
gonna be different, but this is
So we don't have the
compatible with
buttons
that.
yet.
No,
Okay.
Chad says yes, but it's a
Well,
yes to a no,
There's,
so it's
I can talk about it later, but there's some issues in the state and the RFP they did, so
They're still working
it's,
on it.
there's still trying to
they had to redo it. They did it once and then they had to redo it again, so.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other questions? We will be voting on these tonight. All right,
So this is just our annual fraud risk assessment where we go through and have to give ourselves a score. Normally we've had perfect score, but because I no longer have a director of accounting who has a CPA, we did not score on that one, but we're still within the a very low fraud risk because of a lot of the processes and policies that we have in place.
Woohoo!
and this is something every year that we have to look
Yep,
at.
every
and
year
then
we have to
approve.
review it, approve it in business meeting, and then I'll submit it to the state auditor.
Okay, any questions? All right, thank you. Well, we'll move on then to our policies. And we'll start.
Yes, I
So
love
fun.
policies. Okay.
Let's start with our first readings.
Okay, here we go. I'm on policy 4067, which is about CPR. We shall provide CPR training to high school students. This does take place in their health class. I verified that. And it is in the Board of Education Health Education course standards. And there are ways in which parents can opt out of that. They have to do it, they have to have access to it at least once in high school. And then it provides a list on lines 43 through 50 as to how you would opt out of that. Are there any questions about the CPR policy? This is a first reading, so we'll go back to policy committee so we can be like, woo, and then move on.
We all do that, by the way.
You do the woo, I knew it. So 4030 is animals on school premises. Did you know that there are miniature
my
horses?
favorite.
I love
It's
this
my
policy so
favorite
much.
policy.
We now allow miniature horses on school campuses.
They get their own heading on the animals.
Yeah, they do. It's pretty great.
Premises policy.
So this policy was updated in response to it used to be that many, many years ago when I was a high school principal, you could only have certified service animals in schools, and now the law has changed so that we have access to different types of animals. So the purpose of this policy is to establish those guidelines, and that animals are permitted pursuant to this policy. And so it creates some definitions and then establishes some general standards regarding those animals that are serving students with disabilities. You can identify, you can ask, for example, what the animal does provide for a person with a disability, but you can't ask really specific questions about the individual's disability. It does give some provisions about if the animal is not housebroken or if there isn't appropriate supervision. There are things in which we can restrict an animal from being on school grounds. It has some specific requirements for miniature horses, mostly about whether or not it's housebroken or how large it is, and can we, actually, have it in a particular building, and then has specific definitions about emotional support animals. And notice that those do have to be domesticated animals, so it's not like a badger. It could be like an emotional support animal. Not that I would pick a badger, but let's say you did, because that's not a domesticated animal usually. So, and then I do think this piece is important, is that before we're denying any access to an animal, they need to coordinate with Devin, myself. It just isn't something that an administrator can just blatantly do. We want to make sure that there's a process, so we're really going through all of that. Questions about animals? Yes.
Terry is not here, but
She
you.
asked- Yeah, I got her text about,
Okay.
what do we do if a student is allergic to an
that's-
animal and we have
somebody had
this?
that question
We
as
have that
well.
question in policy committee. I would call our attorney and kind of work through that, because both of those students are going to have rights, that we're going to have to navigate. So hopefully we can figure out a resolution by putting them in a different class or different things like that. But sometimes there are students that have such severe allergies they can't even be even remotely close to it. So we would have to work through that. That could involve transporting a student to a different location and us taking on that responsibility. That would all come through, say, a 504 accommodation and different pieces. So we just navigate that and work through that. Go ahead.
On line 121, it says only domesticated animals. Should we have a definition of what a domesticated
Yes, we
animal?
can. That's a great point. I'm gonna ask
That's a
them.
very domesticated pig.
Or a domesticated.
Sorry,
Maybe
domesticated.
there is.
I
I
don't
know.
know.
People
Fuller
have
is pretty
pigs.
good.
No, I do too.
Pets.
My sister had
bring
has
my
one. Also, I just thought we just a note to add purpose statement to this one.
Oh, thank you. I thought I had one. Hold on. There is a purpose statement on line 44. It just starts later
Oh, I
because
see.
we were
After
yeah,
definitions.
Yeah,
Okay,
sorry
great.
about that.
No. I have a question. So this seems to just address if someone wants to bring their animal to school. Do we have a policy about like a teacher, well, not an emotional support, but like my family that lives down in Arizona, their district allows a teacher to bring in a trained dog to be like for the classroom, a dog that comes sometimes that helps calm students and things like that. Or gosh, when my kids were in kindergarten years ago, the teacher owned horses, and once in a while her husband would bring a horse like during recess and they could interact with the horse. Do we have a policy about
Yeah, I believe we do, and also in lines 53 to 54, it states that you can bring privately owned animals if with written consent from the principal or superintendent. And I remember we had this issue because we had someone who wanted to bring a snake to one of our elementary schools, and Jason Garrison knows the policy, and it says in the policy you can't bring poisonous animals, and they're like, it's not poisonous, it just strangles people, it doesn't. I was like, no, that didn't make me feel any better about it, so we're like, how about no? So we probably do need to look at, and maybe even reference that policy might be a good idea, so that's a great point.
Is this policy coming from the state?
Yes, it's because of state law that
Okay.
it has changed as a result.
Okay, any other comments or questions on this one?
I knew this one was gonna generate
fun.
questions.
I love it.
Okay.
Okay.
Next one is 4023, which is on sex education. This just updates some of the terminology that was put in recent legislation. So you'll notice that some of these definitions, there are individuals that may disagree with some of these definitions, but this is what's in state code, and this is what we do as a district. And so you'll notice it explicitly states those particular definitions, says that there is a review committee that goes through the materials, that also will look at, for example, SHARP survey data to see if, so they're looking at things like teen pregnancy and pieces like that, and then determining, do the materials that we have, are they addressing the issues that we're seeing across the board? And that if we're adopting anything or utilizing anything in this particular course, it has to be subject to parent and public review. And so just establishes this. This has been our practice, so we're just updating a couple of pieces where the law has become more specific about what is allowed, especially when it goes to line 130 about parental notification and permission and participation and what that specifically looks like. And then notice that all health and sex education guidelines, it stresses abstinence, and it kind of lists all of the different pieces that instruction is allowed to have and what it's not allowed to have. We are allowed also, if you look at line 176, if we wanted to put in place specific curriculum to address sexual abuse and human trafficking, we could do that as well. We have talked about that. I think, Judy, if I remember right, we kind of talked about that in a district leadership meeting. We just, with the firearm safety that we were also adding to teachers, we're just trying to be cognizant of how many different things that we add to their plate. Guest presenters all have to be monitored and in accordance with state law, and that each school has to track if there are any complaints or concerns about what that looks like, and provide a report to the state upon a request, what that looks like. So this is a first reading, so any questions?
This one's not as exciting.
It's not as exciting, I thought. Okay.
All right,
Hold on. Let's talk about policy 4015, parent access to district instructional material. Making sure that parents have reasonable access to the instructional materials used in the education of their children. Has some definitions tied to the policy. Notice that on line 38 it states that parents of students enrolled in the district shall be given notice each year regarding how they may access and review the district's instructional material. This is new legislation that went into effect probably I think a year ago, so we're making sure that this policy is up to date. This is something we did not include in our online registration, but we have it on our list of things that we need to make sure that we have for principals to make sure that our parents are aware of how they can access and request that. Judy's done a fantastic job at our elementary level to make sure that our elementary curriculum is all linked and parents can access what that looks like, because we utilize that district-wide. It gets trickier when you're dealing with subjects like in high school that are kind of an elective subject and the teacher is choosing those materials, but there is a way in which those materials need to be provided on Canvas, and parents can have a parent account and access those things, and we just need to make sure that our parents know how they can do that. So that's just something that I've highlighted there that is on our list of things that we're working on to have ready to go for August. Lines 45 to 65, we're talking about the Education to Canvas. That is our online learning management system, and that becomes a way in which
We
our...
just have different lines.
Oh, you do?
Numbers-
Sorry.
numbers are different
It's
than yours.
okay, that's okay. Don't worry
Well,
about it,
you
keep
probably
going.
do it in the document, the policy.
Yeah, I'm in the live document.
That's right.
We're like 29.
Okay,
that's
so
probably-
parent access to online course learning management systems, that portion of it is making sure that our parents know how to access basically a guest account so they can monitor what their kids are doing on campus. Which I think is great that we have that. I think it's awesome.
Well, and isn't it also true though, even with our secondary teachers, that they're choosing primary and even secondary resources from curriculum materials that have been reviewed for the most part,
Unless it's
right?
unless it's a supplemental
But even
material.
then, there are kind of
There are very strict parameters.
guidelines and
yep,
parameters
yep,
around that,
That's
so.
absolutely the case.
Yeah, that's a question.
And if a parent
Yeah.
wants to have access to those things, they have every
They
right
can,
to have
yes.
access to it. Yep. So, okay, any questions on that policy? Woo, first
Okay.
reading's done, look at that.
Good job.
Did that fast. Okay, now we're on to second reads. These are important. You're gonna be approving these in the next meeting. So here we go. We gotta take good notes, Bonnie, so if we have to make any changes, we know what they are when you're voting on them, so. Okay, policy 5027 is about employee associations and wage deductions. That if there is a wage deduction for that association and it's coming out of their pay, one, it can't be required, and two, it can't be used for any kind of political purposes. So that has to come as a separate piece of that. A majority of our employees that are a part of the association use electronic fund transfer, but I do think we looked up and it was around 100 that are still utilizing payroll deductions. So we have all of those lined out in what's prohibited, and that's in alignment with what our practice is with our association. So any questions there? Okay. 5028 is about employee associations and leave. It has been a common practice, at least when I was a teacher, that you had the association was granted as part of their negotiated agreement association leave that a president or a vice president could receive where they're working on different educational goals. That is still allowed as long as they are not advocating for specific political parties, specific political candidates, something that is tied to association only. If they're going and helping us, say, with an RFP for insurance to benefit employees, and that's a district assignment, then that is something where we can grant that association leave and it doesn't come out of that person's personal time off. But it can't be tied to these specific political activist things, and our association is really, really good about working with us on that, and they take their own personal time if they're doing anything that's tied to that, and they keep those things very separate and distinct. So, any questions on that? Okay, policy 5245 is about employee transfers. There are a couple of different kinds of transfers. There's one where an employee is asking to be transferred. They're seeking a job somewhere else. They might be teaching at this school and they want to switch to a different school because there's a different assignment. They teach at a different grade level or something. There's also what's known as an involuntary transfer, a district initiated transfer. That could be an instance where we're just like, this teacher is just not working really great with this particular team, but they're a great teacher, so we just want to give them a fresh start in a different location. We've done that sometimes with a custodian or something like that, where we've helped with that, and that would be a type of district initiated transfer. This lays out the process, especially for what that looks like for those voluntary transfers, and how they interview for that, what that approval looks like. And then district initiated transfers can be requested by principals, but do have to be approved by the superintendent or by like our deputy superintendent. And then it is also talking about if we have to have a reduction in force, which are also our subsequent policy really details that out, but it's in two different places. Just basically if for some reason there was a situation of we had, let's say, we decided no longer we were going to have a certain CTE program, for example, and so then we were going to have a reduction in force because we didn't need that particular group of teachers anymore. That would be called what we would call a RIF in that process, and we would follow these guidelines in that. Our associations have looked at these policies and provided feedback, and this is our practice, so this is just updating different language. And then I can do the next one, which is 5290, which is the reduction in force. And this really talks about budgetary constraints or the discontinuation of a program, and that the superintendent would come to the board and we would explain why this is necessary, what positions need to be eliminated. This is kind of also what happened when we did some restructuring of the district a few years ago. This kind of works in that same type of way, and that we don't follow the last hired, first fired. That's not allowed in state code. And then you see that there's an accompanying procedure that's tied to that lays out what this process looks like. And we really try to make sure if we're doing anything like that, it happens by the middle of March. But let's say for some reason there was a situation where our state enrollment numbers came in really low in April or something, and so our funding went down, and we recognized we had to let go of 5 more teachers or something like that. That would go under this reduction in force policy, and we work with the association on that. Also, if a position then becomes available, we can recall that teacher back and give them an opportunity to come back, and so we have a process for what that looks like. Questions on those two? Are very closely related, so.
Good.
Okay, religious neutrality, 4340. The purpose of this policy is to make sure that we're affirming and protecting the constitutional rights and religious freedoms of students, employees, and members of the public that are in alignment with the Constitution and the Utah Constitution, federal and state law. I think the line, it's under the section where it talks about constitutional freedom in public schools. It's the 2 blue lines. American history and heritage documents may not be excluded from study or censored due to their religious or cultural nature. And those are very important. I can't imagine, like, I've always used religious documents as a social studies teacher, and so you're using it in the context of history and the impact that has, but it's in policy, so teachers can feel protected in that, in utilizing those. Talks about the religious neutrality, which has been in place for a long time, and then also talks about participation waivers that students and or their parents, because of a right of conscience or religious belief, can choose not to participate in something. We do have a process where if a student is refraining from something, we do want to loop in the parent. We want to let them know what's going on, about what's happening there. And I do like under expressions of belief where it talks about limitations on student expression, practice, or conduct shall be by the least restrictive means necessary to satisfy the school's interest or to satisfy another specifically identified compelling governmental interest. You can't just arbitrarily say, well, I think this is going to cause a disruption, so we're going to stop this. There's a pretty high threshold for what that looks like, and that would be something where administrators are working with district office to work through that. So, questions on that one? Okay, we're just zipping through. Okay, 5200 is about a drug-free workplace. We did add in the purpose statement, we have a drug-free, tobacco smoke-free, vape-free, alcohol-free workplace. And then this is the policy, this is the statement that's given to employees about our drug and alcohol policy that's given by the state that we provide to all employees in that process. So any questions about that?
Do they get that just when they're hired, or is it a yearly?
We get it every year, so yeah, it's every year. Please.
Does the prohibition include nicotine products as well?
Yes. We could even add that. Tobacco kind of is implied in that, but we could add that because those vape cartridges would have
Or
nicotine or patches or things like that. Yeah.
Little, yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
It says tobacco.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. 4412 is about student internships.
5090.
Oh, sorry, 5090, procedure 2. Just kidding. Scope of employment. This one you don't have to vote on because it's just part of 5090. We're just informing that this talks about the scope of employment. This is really what it just talks about, like if a teacher is supervising students after hours, there's still guardrails on what the interaction, it still has to be professional. It's not like you're buddy-buddy just because I'm, taking tickets at a game doesn't mean now I'm friendly with students. No, I'm still in the role of a teacher or an employee, and this is how it has to operate. We have specific requirements about class attendance, transportation. We don't transport students unless there's an emergency, and supervisors have to be informed. Making sure that we don't have conflicting employment. So you don't have another job that requires you to leave before contract time. That's not allowed. And that media contacts do go through Caleb and myself. That employees don't speak for the district. They can speak for themselves as individuals, but they can't speak for the district. Okay, now student internships. Oh my gosh, we're almost done. We only have 2 more. And you guys are still awake? I'm so impressed. Okay, here we go. Student internships. This policy I'm actually really grateful for that this came about in state code because we had students that were going out and working in different workplaces. So what are the types of supports and protections that we're ensuring that our students have as part of this? What kinds of internships are authorized? Notice the standards. We did add under internship standards, if you look at number 3, it seemed confusing where it seemed like the district was providing the transportation to the internship site. So we added language there to say, discuss transportation options for interns to and from work sites. Transportation is not provided by the district, but sometimes we can get them UTA cards or different things like that. We want to make sure that there's proper supervision, that we make sure that we're not putting students at risk in terms of any type of liability, and make sure that our parents are involved in that process. It has a stipulation here about workers' comp and risk management coverage, different safety agreements, and if we need to have a criminal background check in place for an internship provider. And as you're going to see with the governor really pushing apprenticeships and kind of workforce learning in their high school experience, this is going to become even more imperative that we're monitoring these things and ensuring safety for all of our students.
Can I ask a question? And this policy, I know, will inform our teachers who oversee internships, and then parents and students will get a version of this.
That's what I have on our list as well, yes. So this list of all of the things we have to inform our individuals on, this is one of them, yes. Because it traditionally has been something we've kind of left up, and it left up to individual teachers, and we've kind of noticed, I don't know that that's happening, so we need that to really be coming from the district. So just to support in that way. Okay, last one, 4411, is about healthcare occupation programs. That we have to provide notice to parents about what a clinical experience might be in a health occupation environment, and that they have to provide written consent unless the student is 18. And that written consent, we need to be really clear with parents about, like, these are the things your student may experience. If they're learning to be a CNA, there's going to be things that they're going to be seeing and experiencing, and are you okay with that? Any questions on that policy?
I just want to reiterate that all of these policies that are up for first readings go onto our website where the public, any parent, any student, any stakeholder can give us feedback on that first reading policy, and then we bring them back here. We make a policy committee meeting changes based on that feedback that we do get from people to vote, just so that every policy has a chance to be, heard by the public and reviewed. Thanks, Lisa. We appreciate all the hard work of the policy committee, and also a reminder to all board members, if you have thoughts between now and the next few weeks when policy committee meets, then we can also provide that feedback here if you didn't think of it just now. So.
Yeah, we have a whole bunch more policies coming up, so it's going to be
always.
I'm getting so good at legal stuff, and I love chat so much because it helps me with purpose statements. It's pretty great.
All right, well, we've come to the end of our study session agenda. We do have our public hearing followed by our business meeting. It begins at 6 p.m. in our PDC over there. And then our next board meeting will actually be the Truth and Taxation hearing on August 5th, which is a Wednesday, and that will be at 6 p.m. And then our normally scheduled board meeting will be August 11th, that's a Tuesday, at probably our normal time around 4 o'clock. No, course, we'll post more when we get closer to those, but I just wanted people to be aware. Do we have a motion to adjourn our study session?
I move that we adjourn our study session.
Motion made by Board Member Hall. Do we have a second? Second by Vice President Hales. We are adjourned, and we'll see you at the PCSD.
Nice
Did you get the
job.
basic grade?
Yeah.
She did.